The noose they had tied for the stallion was just a rough-spun rope, but the intent was iron. I wasn't there for a job. I was there to stop a murder. The horse they called the Widowmaker wasn't a devil. He was a mirror, reflecting a grief so deep it had poisoned an entire ranch. And as I stepped between the beast and the bullet, I realized the most dangerous thing in the valley wasn't the horse. It was the secret he was protecting. My name is Elara Vance. I arrived in Stone Creek with dust on my boots and a reputation for saving creatures everyone else had given up on. The stallion, Phantom, was a legend of loss. They said he belonged to Caleb Thorne's late wife, Lillian, that since her death 2 years ago, the horse had been unrideable, a violent ghost haunting the corral, a symbol of Caleb's own shattered heart. His daughter, Rose, a girl of no more than 8, was a quiet shadow, her childhood stolen by a silence that seemed to echo from her father. The ranch itself was decaying. Fences sagged, fields grew thin, and the desperate hands saw Phantom not as a relic of love, but as a bad omen that needed putting down. But when I looked into that stallion's eyes, I didn't see a monster. I saw a profound, intelligent grief. I saw a pain I recognized. It was the same unspoken tension that lived in the set of Caleb Thorne's jaw, a man scoured hollow by the prairie wind and his own sorrow. I didn't ask for permission. While the ranch hands watched, their skepticism a physical wall, I slid between the rails of Phantom's pen. I carried no whip, no rope, no trickery. My method was stillness. I stood at the center of his chaos and let him scream his fury into the air, his hooves kicking up plumes of dust around me. I simply watched, my breath steady, my posture open. He circled me, a storm of muscle and black coat. His nostrils flared. But slowly, the frantic pacing slowed. The pinned ears relaxed, his dark, intelligent eyes fixed on me, not with rage, but with a wary curiosity. He took a single step forward, then another, until I could feel the heat coming off his body. I held out my hand, empty. He sniffed it, his muzzle soft against my skin. The crowd at the fence fell silent. That small victory earned me a trial as ranch manager from a reluctant Caleb Thorne. He was a man built of quiet strength and raw grief, his dark hair already peppered with silver at the temples. "You have 1 month," he said, his voice gravelly. "The horse is the key. If he doesn't accept you, nothing else will." But a new threat arrived before I could even begin. Silas Vane. He wasn't some slick outsider. He was a local cattle baron, his land bordering the Thorne property. He was ruthless, charismatic, and he moved through the town of Stone Creek like he owned its soul. He didn't want to buy Caleb out. I saw it in his cold eyes. He wanted to break him. The first rehook came a week later. A section of fence along the northern pasture was cut clean. Through. We found the posts sawn, the work deliberate. We spent a day driving the scattered cattle back. Caleb said nothing, but the grim set of his mouth spoke volumes. The second rehook was more sinister. A small, contained fire in the main haystack. It was caught early, but the message was clear. This was escalation. That night, as I made my rounds, an instinct pulled me toward the water trough by the breaking corral. The water smelled wrong, bitter. I knelt, my heart hammering against my ribs. Slick rainbow-colored streaks floated on the surface. Poison. If the horses had drunk from it. I didn't wait for Caleb. I emptied the trough, scrubbed it clean with sand, and refilled it from the well. When I told him, his face went pale. "Vane," was all he said. The third and biggest rehook came not from Vane, but from the land itself. Taking Phantom on a long, cautious ride to build trust, I let him choose his path. He led me away from the grazing lands, up into a rugged, forgotten canyon I'd never seen on any map. The air changed, growing cooler. The sound of trickling water led us to a hidden spring, bubbling up from rocks that glittered with strange metallic streaks. This was Lillian's secret place. I could feel it. And there, tucked beneath a flat, mossy rock, was a rusted metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a map. It was hand-drawn, intricate, and in the corner, a single word was written in a graceful feminine hand, Argentum, silver. That night, Vane's men escalated again. They didn't just cut a fence or light a fire. They stampeded a small herd of our cattle, driving them wild-eyed and terrified straight through the boundary fence and toward Vane's own wheat fields. The plan was diabolical. Let Thorne's trespassing cattle destroy Vane's crops, giving Vane the perfect legal pretext to seize land as compensation. The night erupted in a chaos of bawling and thundering hooves. Caleb shouted, grabbing his rifle. But I was already moving. I didn't saddle him, I just slid a bridle over Phantom's head and swung onto his bare back. There was no time for doubt. "Yeah!" I cried, and Phantom surged forward. He was no longer a grieving ghost. He was a force of nature. We flew over the rough ground, cutting alongside the panicked herd. I leaned low, speaking into his ear, guiding him with my knees and the pressure of my hands. He understood the urgency. Together, we drove toward the front of the stampede, turning the leaders, forcing the massive, mindless flow into a wide, grinding arc away from Vane's land and back toward our own broken fence. It was a desperate moonlit ballet of dust and raw power. When it was over, I slumped on Phantom's back, my hands tangled in his mane, both of us breathing in ragged, heaving gasps. We stood in the corral, the adrenaline slowly fading. Caleb walked up to us, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with a dawning, profound respect. He looked from me to Phantom, who stood calm and steady beneath me. Later, in the quiet of the barn, I showed Caleb the map. He unfolded it with trembling hands. As his eyes traced the lines, the color drained from his face. "Lillian died out near these ridges," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She said she'd found a curse. She was so excited, then so afraid. I thought she meant the terrain, the cougars." He looked at me, and the fear in his eyes was a new, chilling kind. "This is what got her killed, isn't it?" I had no answer. But the battle for this ranch had just changed. It was no longer just about saving a horse or a home. It was about uncovering a truth buried deep enough to kill for. A curse or a fortune? The line between them is thinner than a knife's edge. If your heart is still pounding from that midnight ride, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. The real danger is just beginning. Subscribe now, because in part 2, the shadows start to talk, and trusting the wrong person could get them all killed. The map was a ghost in my hand, and the man who wanted it was a wolf at the door. We'd survived his stampede, but Silas Vane wasn't a man who gave up. He was a man who learned, and when he learned that Caleb Thorne's new woman was poking around in places she shouldn't, his games ended, the war began. He didn't want our land anymore. He wanted us dead and buried with the secret we'd uncovered. The weathered paper felt heavy with consequence. In the lamplight of Caleb's study, with the scent of old leather and dust around us, the map was no longer just a drawing. It was a confession. The silver vein, which Lillian had labeled Argentum, ran like a serpent beneath the earth, originating deep in the rocky, unclaimed ridges before twisting directly beneath Thornland, and, crucially, under a significant portion of Vane's prized grazing pastures. "She wanted to partner with him," Caleb said, his voice hollow. He traced the line on the map with a calloused finger. "Lillian believed in community. She thought if we presented it together, we could build up the whole territory. She went to talk to him that morning." The sentence hung in the air, unfinished. The riding accident that had claimed her life now smelled of blood and betrayal. The stakes were no longer about saving a ranch. They were about uncovering a murder. And Rose, the quiet little girl who had just begun to smile at me over breakfast, was now the most vulnerable target in a game of lethal greed. Our strategy shifted from defense to investigation. We had to move like shadows. The first rehook came from the town's underbelly. I spent days in the saloon, not drinking, but listening. I traded stories with old trappers and freight drivers. I learned that a drifter named Eli Sutter, known for doing odd jobs for Vane, had left the territory abruptly 2 years ago, right after Lillian's death. The rumor was Vane had paid him a hefty sum to start fresh down in Texas. He was a ghost, but he was our ghost. A tangible thread connecting Vane to the timing of Lillian's death. The second rehook was far more dangerous. Phantom and I were scouting the perimeter of Vane's land, staying well within our own tree line, when we saw it. A crew of Vane's men, led by his foreman, a brute named Jeb, setting up new survey markers. But they weren't on the disputed boundary. They were pushing deep into the canyon, our canyon, the one with the hidden spring. They were staking a claim on Lillian's sanctuary. We rode back at a gallop. Caleb's face turned to stone when I told him. "He's making his move," he muttered. "He knows we have the map, or he suspects it. He's creating facts on the ground." 2 days later, the official blow fell. A writer from the Territorial Land Office delivered a document to our door. It cited a rediscovered and corrected survey, signed and sealed by Land Agent Horace Finch. The new maps blatantly redrew the lines, placing the entire canyon, the spring, and the probable path of the Silver Vein squarely on Vane's property. The ultimatum was simple: vacate the trespassed land within 48 hours or face forcible removal. Vane had corrupted the law itself. We weren't just fighting a rancher, we were fighting the system. We were trapped. A direct confrontation with Vane's men would be suicide. Our only hope was to find irrefutable proof before the deadline, proof of the silver and proof of Vane's crime. That led to the third and most desperate rehook. Under the cover of a moonless night, Caleb and I decided to sneak into the canyon. We needed a physical piece of the Silver Vein, a rock sample that would be impossible to ignore. It was a terrible risk, but it was the only card we had left to play. Phantom moved like his namesake, his hooves making barely a whisper on the soft earth. Rose was left with the most trusted of our few remaining hands, the old cook, with strict instructions to hide in the root cellar at the first sign of trouble. The canyon was eerily quiet. We found the glittering seam of rock exactly where Lillian's map indicated. As Caleb worked with a small pick to pry a sample loose, the silence was shattered. "Look what we have here," a voice drawled from the darkness. Silas Vane himself stepped out from behind a boulder, a smug smile on his face. Jeb and 4 other men emerged behind him, their rifles held loosely. It had been a trap all along. "Trespassing and theft on my legally recognized property. I believe that gives me the right to defend what's mine." The world narrowed to the glint of moonlight on gun barrels. Caleb slowly straightened up, the chunk of ore heavy in his hand. "It was never yours, Vane," Caleb said, his voice low and deadly. "Lillian found it, and you killed her for it." Vane's smile didn't falter. "A tragic accident? She fell? A real shame? A woman with too much imagination and not enough sense." "The drifter, Eli Sutter," I said, taking a step forward. I had to keep him talking, create a distraction. "He's not in Texas. We found him. He's willing to talk." It was a bluff, but a good one. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vane's face. That was all the opening we needed. "Now, Phantom!" I shouted. I hadn't just been bonding with the stallion, I'd been training him. At my command, Phantom didn't charge. He reared, a massive, terrifying silhouette against the night sky, letting out a piercing scream that echoed through the canyon like a demon's cry. For a split second, Vane's men were frozen, startled by the sudden, unnatural fury of the beast. In that heartbeat of confusion, all hell broke loose. Caleb dropped the oar and went for his gun. The crack of a rifle shot ripped through the air. I felt Caleb grunt and stumble beside me, his hand flying to his shoulder, where a dark stain began to spread. Jeb had fired. "Caleb!" I screamed. Phantom, enraged by the gunshot and my cry, plunged into the group of men. He wasn't biting or kicking wildly. He was a force of chaos, spinning, rearing, using his immense body as a weapon. He drove his shoulder into Jeb, sending the man flying. The others scattered, trying to get a clear shot, but fearing to hit each other in the dark. I grabbed Caleb's good arm. "We have to go." We scrambled onto Phantom's back. There was no time for gentleness. I dug my heels in, and he launched forward, crashing through the undergrowth, leaving the shouts and confusion behind us. Bullets whizzed past our heads, snapping branches around us. Phantom ran with a desperate ground-eating stride I didn't know he possessed, driven by instinct and the bond we had forged. We didn't stop until the ranch house was in sight, both of us gasping, Caleb bleeding, our hearts pounding a frantic rhythm of escape. We burst into the house, barricading the door. Caleb slumped into a chair, his face pale. I tore open his shirt to reveal a deep, bleeding graze along his shoulder. It was painful, but not mortal. As I cleaned and bandaged the wound, my hands trembled not from the blood, but from the cold certainty that had settled in my gut. We had the ore sample, a heavy, glittering lump of rock that proved Lillian right. But Vane had the law, the numbers, and now a justified pretext for violence. We had wounded his pride and his men. He wouldn't stop. As the first hints of dawn tinged the sky gray, Old Man Peterson, our loyal hand, peered through a crack in the shutters. His voice was a dry rasp. "They're coming." I looked out. A cloud of dust was moving toward us down the main road. At its head, I could make out the figure of Silas Vane. He wasn't hiding anymore. This was it. The final reckoning. Cornered, outgunned, and with the law twisted against them, the dawn is bringing not light, but a final bloody showdown. Was saving the stallion the beginning of their salvation or the act that signed their death warrants? What would you do in their place? Stand and fight, or run and lose everything? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. The explosive conclusion is coming in the next part. Subscribe now so you don't miss the moment when the ghosts of the past decide the fate of the living. The sun rose on what we thought would be our last day. Silas Vane was at our gate with a crooked deed and a dozen guns. We had 2 rifles, a wounded man, a frightened child, and a stallion that had learned to love again. But we had one thing he didn't, a reason to fight that was bigger than silver. We were fighting for the family we'd built from the ashes of our pasts. And sometimes, that's the only ammunition you need. The dust cloud solidified into men on horseback, their faces hard and set. Silas Vane sat at the center, pristine and cold as a rattlesnake. Beside him, Land Agent Horace Finch fidgeted with his reins, the corrupt official who had signed our death warrant. Behind them, Jeb and the others looked eager for violence, their pride still stinging from the chaos in the canyon. Inside the ranch house, the air was thick with gun oil and fear. Caleb's shoulder was bandaged tight, his movements stiff and painful, but his eyes held a cold fire I'd never seen. Rose clutched the leg of my trousers, her small body trembling. Our few remaining loyal hands, Old Man Peterson and 2 young brothers named Will and Thomas, checked their rifles, their faces pale but resolute. We were a pitiful fortress against the army outside. The stakes were no longer abstract. It was no longer about land or silver. It was about survival. It was about preventing a massacre. If Vane won today, the official story would be that he had lawfully evicted a group of violent squatters. Our bodies would be buried in unmarked graves, and the secret of the silver would die with us. Rose's life was the highest stake of all. Vane didn't bother with a parley. He simply raised a hand, and his men opened fire. The first volley shattered windows and thudded into the thick wooden walls of the house. We ducked below the sills, our world reduced to the deafening roar of gunfire and the smell of splintered wood. The first rehook. The assault. Jeb and several men charged the house on foot, using the barn and water troughs for cover. They were met with a hail of fire from our windows. Caleb, gritting his teeth against the pain in his shoulder, picked his shots with a terrifying calm. I saw one of Vane's men fall, and the others scrambled back. The first wave was broken, but it was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed us. We were pinned down, our ammunition finite. The second rehook, a desperate gambit. During a brief lull in the shooting, I made a choice. "I'm taking Phantom," I said to Caleb. "Elara, no, it's suicide out there." "He's not just a weapon, Caleb. He's a symbol, and he's faster than their bullets." I slipped out the oar, back through the kitchen, and ran for the stable. Phantom was agitated, pacing his stall, his ears flat against the roar of the guns. I didn't saddle him. I just slid onto his back and kicked the stable door open. We exploded into the open. I leaned low over his neck, guiding him not toward the men, but in a wide, sweeping arc around the property. I was a screaming, chaotic distraction, a dark rider on a legendary beast. I saw rifles swing away from the house to track me. Shots kicked up dirt around us, but Phantom was a blur, his movements unpredictable. I was buying time. I was praying the gamble I'd set in motion days ago would pay off. The third rehook. The turning tide. As I drew the fire, a new sound cut through the gunfire, the thunder of more hooves. But this wasn't from Vane's direction. Over the ridge came a sight that made my heart leap. A dozen riders, led by the grizzled bear-like form of Olaf Peterson, the neighboring rancher I'd sent a message to days prior, warning him of Vane's land grab tactics. He'd brought his sons and his own tough-as-nails hands. They weren't fighting for us. They were fighting for themselves, knowing they'd be next if Vane's corrupted law was allowed to stand. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Vane's men, now caught between the house and Olaf's charging riders, were thrown into disarray. But the true climax was happening away from the main fray. I saw my chance. I drove Phantom straight toward the heart of the conflict, where Silas Vane and Land Agent Finch were trying to rally their panicking men. Caleb, seeing my move, burst from the front door, his rifle in his good hand. Vane saw Caleb coming. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Thorne, come to die with the rest of your trash?" "This is for Lillian," Caleb growled, his voice carrying over the din. The two men faced each other, a few yards apart. The gunfight around them seemed to fade into the background. This was personal, primal. "You think I killed her?" Vane laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I didn't push her, if that's what you think." We argued. She was a foolish woman with a foolish dream. She turned her horse to ride away, and it spooked. It threw her. She hit her head on a rock. His smile widened. "I just watched. I watched the life leave her eyes. It was simpler that way. No messy evidence, just a tragic accident." The confession, cold and stark, hung in the air, and it was heard by more than just us. From behind a wagon, U.S. Marshal John Corvin stepped into view, his star gleaming on his chest. The drifter, Eli Sutter, stood sheepishly beside him. My bluff hadn't been a bluff after all. My earlier inquiries had borne fruit, and the marshal had been investigating Finch for weeks. They had arrived with Olaf and had heard every damning word. "Silas Vane," the marshal's voice boomed, "you are under arrest for the murder of Lillian Thorne." Vane's face contorted in shock and rage. He was a man who had always controlled everything, and in an instant he had lost it all. He went for his gun in a final, desperate act of defiance, but Caleb was faster. His shot was clean and true. It took Vane in the shoulder, spinning him around. The gun flew from his hand. It wasn't a killing shot. It was justice. Caleb had given him to the law, not to the grave. With their leader disarmed and confessing, and a U.S. Marshal on the scene, the fight went out of Vane's men. They dropped their weapons. Land Agent Finch was arrested on the spot. The battle was over. The aftermath was a blur of exhaustion and dawning relief. The wounded were seen to. Vane and his accomplices were taken away. The corrupt survey was nullified. Weeks later, under a wide, forgiving sky, the Stone Creek Ranch was healing. The fences were straight, the fields were green, and the sound of Rose's laughter was a constant, beautiful music. Caleb's shoulder had mended, and the hollows in his heart were slowly filling. One evening, as the sun set the prairie on fire, Caleb led me to the corral where Phantom stood, sleek and content. He didn't have a ring. He simply took my hands, his gaze steady and sure. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save a horse. You saved me. You saved my daughter. You fought for a home that was becoming a ghost. Stay. Be my wife. Let us be a family." My answer was not in a single word, but in the tears that streamed down my face as I nodded, as I fell into his arms. "Yes," I finally whispered against his chest. "Yes to you, to Rose, to this life." Our wedding was small, held in the same canyon where Lillian had found her curse and we had found our truth. Olaf Peterson gave me away. Rose was our flower girl, her basket overflowing with wildflowers. And Phantom, our majestic, loyal Phantom, stood quietly by, a living testament to the power of trust, his coat gleaming in the sun, a ghost no more. We didn't build an empire on the silver. We sealed the mine, leaving Lillian's secret to the earth. Some treasures aren't meant to be dug up. The real wealth was right here, a second chance, a family forged in fire, and the unbreakable bond between a woman, a man, and the wild heart they had tamed together. From a bullet at dawn to a vow at dusk, their journey shows that the greatest strength is found not in fighting alone, but in fighting together. Did this ending mend your heart as it did mine? If this story of redemption, grit, and fierce love stayed with you, share your favorite moment in the comments. And if you're ready for another tale where love wins against all odds, tap subscribe and join me for the next one. Until then, may your own trails lead you home.